Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where I am pleased to announce that Justin and Meredith Ballotta have agreed to join us. Thanks for coming on the show, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And so here's where we discuss how family and careers are intertwined. We realize there's no balance, but there is this combining of the two. And so you guys are exciting examples of how you drive all of this. We'd love to start with just taking a minute for each of you to give me a bit of a quick snapshot of either what you're doing now or what you've done most recently, because both you guys have rather interesting backgrounds. And this way we can give some context to everyone, so who you are, and then from there we get into some of the fun stuff about how you drive all this nonsense.
Sounds good. Go.
Sure. Hi, thank you again for having us.
Sure.
I am currently a stay-at-home mom. I stay with our three young kiddos. We have 3, 7, 5, and 3. Pierce, Abigail, and Ethan. Prior to staying home with them, I worked in hospital administration and healthcare consulting. So when we met, we were both in healthcare. I was a consultant at that time and then went in-house and worked on the operations side of ambulatory care primarily.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin. I'm going to poke at that in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been in medical devices my entire career. I started out with Johnson & Johnson and spent about a dozen years there, mostly in the cardiovascular space. Spent a significant amount of time out in Europe, leading our European R&D team out there. Came back to the United States, was living in Miami at the time, decided to take an opportunity out in California. And so I moved there about, I guess I was about 13 years ago now. That's where Meredith and I met. But when I was out there, I was still working for J&J, and then decided to take a bit of a risk and go into a portfolio company from a venture capital firm that was called PTV Healthcare Capital at the time. That was led by one of my mentors from J&J. And that was Cardiva Medical. And I stayed at Cardiva for about 11 years, running everything from product development, clinical, regulatory, quality. And recently we exited that company to Haemonetics. I stayed on with Haemonetics for about a year, a little more than that, and helped with the transition. And about 3 years ago, played about a dual role, helped start up a venture capital private equity firm called Revival Healthcare Capital. And so now I've transitioned over to the investing side of things. And it's been a fantastic career move, but been able to do that with the support of Meredith and the family. And it's been an interesting transition.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting. I've known Justin for a long time, so interesting is underselling it. We'll get to the second. So Meredith, I'm curious if you saw or foresaw, maybe that's a better word, how the ambulatory side of the business would develop. It's become, with these ambulatory surgical centers, have become such a major part of the medical community. Was it obvious back then, or no?
I think it was. So I started consulting at a firm called the Chartis Group, whose clients primarily were hospital systems, academic, children's hospitals, physician groups, and many others. But I started doing that in 2008. So even at that time, there was a big push towards ambulatory care, moving procedures that had been inpatient to outpatient for a number of reasons, cost being one, kind of safety, throughput, providing better access for patients. All of these factors played into moving towards ambulatory care. So even at that time, my team that I worked closely with was really working on access and throughput in ambulatory centers, knowing that volumes were continuing to increase, more procedures were being done in the outpatient setting, just moving to a more proactive primary care model, medical home model, all encourage this increase in volume in outpatient centers that at that time weren't prepared for that. So we were preparing for that, and even looking forward to telehealth and really meeting the patient where they were and not even having them come into facilities was at that time going to be the next step. And now that's obviously already happening, and with the pandemic happening even more.
So Do you guys run into the same situation that I do, that people think because you've been in healthcare for so long that you're MDs?
Sometimes I think when our kids were even younger, there was some confusion of, well, you're going to a hospital to work, so you must be caring for patients. Like, well, I'm removed from the patient care, but I'm hopefully helping those that are caring for patients, but not as much.
Yeah, whenever something happens, somebody gets hurt. I coach a lot of youth sports. Somebody gets hurt, or someone in my family gets sick. My mom, thankfully, is a cancer survivor, and my dad's had a bunch of heart attacks and all this thing. Like, my brother and sister look at me. I'm like, everybody, you know me. I didn't go to med school. I talk to people every day. It's not by osmosis that I learn what they know. And it happens quite a bit, and it's just funny. But your kids are kind of young, so they probably don't have as much of a concern. They just know you guys go to work.
Well, the amount of Band-Aids that we go through in a given week, whether it's required or not, would probably qualify us for some type of nursing care.
Yeah, well, you've got, look, I grew up with a brother and sister, so similar to what you guys have. And with the boys, there was always a stunt show going on every day. How high can we jump off of? Can we get on the roof? And my mom would just beg, please stop. And, that's just encouraging us. That's not deterring us. Yeah. So let's catch up a bit on this. So Justin, you moved overseas, which I always find to be an interesting topic.
Yeah.
But you guys hadn't met before then, right? You didn't know her?
No, I did not. Yeah.
So touching on the whole family work life saga, did you think about that, saying, man, if I move overseas to Europe, I cut kind of my social ties here in the US, I'm away from my family, I'm in essence starting from scratch again. Do you think of that from a family standpoint? You're like, listen, this is totally a career decision. I want to go. I've always wanted to live in Europe. Like, how does the other side of your life enter into that decision?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It was, I did it early. I did it in my mid 20s, early 20s, and I guess, but you do cut ties and you start over, and, you start to create a new life. And, first year was, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, so let me travel and let me try and experience everything I can. And then year 2, you start to realize, well, this might be longer term here. So let me start to integrate. Let me start to understand, know my neighbors and develop friends locally here. I don't need to travel every weekend to see everything. And so you start to build a life, and you start to understand the culture a little bit more, and you start to really call it home. And then I kind of got to year 3 and year 4, and that's where, I certainly had friends back in the United States starting to settle down, and things were getting more serious with their significant others. And I certainly had the internal conversation of saying, all right, well, am I going to plop down here and this is where I'm going to make my roots, or is it time to maybe go back and start a life over again, really, in the United States? And that was ultimately what I chose to do. I could have stayed in Europe, but no, I decided to come home and kind of start over a little bit again. But it was fun. It was something that I absolutely recommend anyone doing if you have the opportunity. It was a chance of a lifetime. With that being said, if I were to do it over again and looking back now and looking back how we travel and have fun, like, it would have been a 10x experience if I would have been doing it with Meredith. And so, we look back, and, even Meredith, we still talk about like where I lived, and we had actually plans prior to the pandemic to actually go back to the Netherlands, the northern part of the Netherlands where I was, and visit some of those places. And unfortunately, those plans got squelched with several other people's. But, it's something that we certainly on our bucket list and things that we want to do.
I've always been a big fan of the Dutch, because they're the types who tell you your baby's ugly and then buy you a beer.
And they do it with a smile.
Yeah. They're not trying to hurt your feelings. Like, your baby's not good. But then let's go grab some dinner. And I've had, and that's the way I try to live my life. Like, look, I'm going to be kindly candid to you. And so, and plus the English there is great. And so I'm sure that made the transition a little easier for you, because language was not an issue. Did you find that their English for the most part is solid, right?
Oh, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I gave it a good college try to learn the language. It's funny, I was telling the story the other day, but I had a cultural coach and everything else, and they asked me what my goal was. My goal was to
ride a bike.
well, I could ride a bike, but my goal was to at least not be pegged as an American, like walking into a place without even opening my mouth. And they just looked at me and said, that's not possible. And, and it was like, okay, well, that was my only goal here. And so because the English was actually so great and communication was stellar, I forewent some of that and decided to go and do other things. But no, the communication, not only just the language, but the style is what you're kind of referring to. I found actually somewhat refreshing, and certainly took that back. And I probably still have a bit of Dutch style in me and my management style, just because I liked it.
Yeah, I've taken trains through there. I've seen the country. It's funny. I've spent very little time in Amsterdam, but I've been throughout the country, and I just always found it beautiful there. It's quaint. It's almost like they're in a different century. Once you leave the main cities, it's with windmills. It's just different. So when you came back to the States, I'm going to California and meeting your better half here. I'm curious, Meredith, you had a big time job going at UCSF. I mean, you had some serious stuff happening in your life, and director of patient access, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So a significant amount of responsibility. And at what point did you guys decide that you're going to make this official?
Make our relation?
Yeah. Meaning you're going to marry each other. And then at that point, you're like, how does this affect my career? Does it change anything at that point?
Right. So when we met, I was a consultant. So I was actually traveling quite a bit, which is difficult in and of itself. I was on a long-term project in Milwaukee. And when we first started dating, and I had to travel every week, Monday through Thursday. And Justin came out a couple of times, and I don't know if we stayed the weekend, but worked from there, and to make sure that we were seeing each other enough, because it is difficult when you're first starting a relationship and traveling so much. That was actually a special part of that experience. We were also training for a half marathon. We did the San Francisco half marathon during that time too. And so I'd come home, we'd train on the weekends, and I'd go back, and I just remember that being kind of a funny experience as well. But I didn't start working with UCSF until after our first son was born.
Oh, really?
So I stayed as a consultant, and I guess shortly before he was born, I took an internal role and was supporting our content development and some of our practice areas. So I was working from home quite a bit, especially during the first year after Pierce was born. And then I started working for UCSF, who had been a client of mine. And so I knew the leadership team there, and they were developing this patient care access team. And so I led that team, and it was a wonderful experience. And they were actually right up the street from us when we lived in San Francisco. Yeah. We lived just down the hill from UCSF in Coal Valley. So I could walk to work, which was fun. Yeah. And I had a great experience. But I think it was, back to your question, when did we kind of decide to get married? We dated for a couple of years, and
it was right when I decided to leave J&J, go to a startup, and start my MBA at the same time. Right. And I think we got married all within like 6 months.
Yeah. We like
That's
to keep
how I
things
remember.
Interesting and complicated.
I've always been engaged, gravitated, attracted to couples like you guys, where there's this certain level of capacity, and you could just tell you guys are both ascending, and it's not a competition, but I think the rising tide raises all boats kind of mentality happens in this kind of couple, where you guys just keep going and going and going. And it always blows me away that you're somehow able to find time to get married or find time to have a child, and all these kinds of things that happen because your lives are so full, and you're running half marathons, doing things like that. Like when do you sit down and say, okay, we need to detach from our work stuff for just a second and say, what kind of life are we building? Where do we want it to be? How many kids do we want? How many marathons do we want to run? Like all these kinds of things that you want to try to plan, because you're still relatively young. So how does that go? Do you plan that out, or you just say, hey, listen, we're going to play it as it comes, and whatever arrives each week, we're going to address it then?
I think several of those conversations happened over glasses of wine up in Napa, which we
Those are
were
the best
living in the
kind.
Bay Area,
Yeah.
exploring all of the wonderful areas around the Bay Area. And I think, I really do think some of those conversations just happened organically on the weekends. Our work weeks were so busy, especially when I was traveling as a consultant. But we really took advantage of the weekends, and we were, I would say, foodies at the time. We tried a lot of fun restaurants in San Francisco, and we would have those kind of longer term conversations while dining out or up in Napa or skiing in Tahoe. So I don't know that it was conscious, okay, let's talk about the future now. I think we're both somewhat planners, and we knew, we kind of both knew we wanted what we wanted, and it was very much aligned from the beginning. So
we didn't have any family out in California. We were out there on our own. And so I think those conversations started to become, we always had them, but they started to become more real. And I think we started to take more action, start taking more decisions as the kids started to come. And I just feel that, you know, if you always asked us, we loved California. And if you always asked, well, when are you guys moving back, or when are you guys moving somewhere else? It was always 5 to 7 years. And if you asked next year, it was still 5 to 7. And next year after that, still 5 to 7,
Yeah,
right? It was just that just kept getting pushed out. And, but it was by the time after we had our first child, we moved out of San Francisco and moved over into the East Bay. And then we had our second child. And then when the third one came along, right, it was, well, what do we want to do, and what kind of parents do we want to be? And I was traveling a lot. Meredith was working and still working at UCSF. And so, you know, that's when the opportunity came. And I started Revival at that point in time with my partners. And it was, well, that's going to be based in Austin. Meredith's family is here in Austin. And so it was like, well, maybe now's the time, right? It's no longer 5 to 7. Maybe it's now. And that was 2018. And so we decided to pick up and do it. And Cardiva was extremely supportive at that time of me taking a remote job, really before remote was as popular as it is now. And looking back, our timing really couldn't have been better. We kind of beat a little bit of the rush here to Austin, and then the pandemic hit, and you know, it was a fantastic place to, you know, to ride that out, at least the, you know, the beginning portions of it, where, you know, things were a little scarier and people were really locked down, but being next to family and having that kind of little network was a fantastic move. So all in all, you know, that's when we really started to take action on just kind of what lives we wanted to live and kind of how we wanted to raise our kids.
Well, that's an interesting juxtaposition of being planners and then also being somewhat spontaneous. I'm sure your family, Meredith, was glad to get their hooks into their kids. That's usually how that goes.
Yeah.
You know, they start doing this nonsense. My in-laws are like that. We go to Ohio every year, and my in-laws cannot wait. And my kids are 17 and 15, so they're kind of like, we're good with the hugs. But when they're 7, 5, and 3, it's like magic. So Justin's underselling much of what he's done. So let's talk about that for a second, because I've always been impressed with the fact that your side hustle was getting into the investment side of medical device while still working full-time at a company. Because I think, because I have a little intimate knowledge, I can say it comfortably that Cardiva wasn't always going great.
That's right.
Cardiva was a bumpy ride, and I know, Justin, and I know people who worked at Cardiva, that for the 10 years you were there, because I know Roger too. Raj and I go back a long time, but you guys weathered that, and now look what happened. And you're just an incredible statement of sometimes sticking around is the best thing to do, even when everything else is pointing to, hey, maybe I should start looking.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'd love to probe at that just a little bit and say, okay, what prompted you to say, you know what, I hear you, and I know these other recruiters are calling me. I'm sure you're getting opportunities knowing you, and yet you kept saying, no, I'm going to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a couple of close calls, you know, looking back, you know, just being candid, where we really kind of took a deep look and said, you know, is this the right time to maybe take another opportunity? You know, and it's kind of equated to golf. You can have a really bad round of golf, but you have a fantastic 18th hole and it keeps you coming back. Yep. You know, and And that was a little bit of what we had, right? And every time things would get a little shaky, it was have a fantastic team. And I like the direction that we're going. We made a couple missteps, but we're learning. And I think we had a really supportive investor group. Management had a bit of a changeover, as we continued to find the right people to lead the business in the transitions that we were going through. But it was always, I've got this great opportunity, but I really want to see this through. And I felt that it was really important to put, really big win on the board. And that's what I wanted to do. But if you also look back, I'm a fairly loyal person, and I like to stay and I like to really build. I don't really career jump, even though I've had a lot of experiences. It's always been within the same operating unit within J&J or within the same kind of sector. And then with Cardiva, it's 11 plus years almost, my total tenure. So, but it was kind of really about the people, and building the people around, that helped build this thing up. And I felt like I had I had some commitment.
Mm-hmm. I think you really believed in the product too. I think at the end of the day, that
has to happen. Yeah.
Kept you there. You knew that there were bumps along the way, but you really believed in the product and that it really was helping, or kind of filling a gap in the market that wasn't there, and that you were getting great responses from the doctors that were using it. So that I think also kept you committed to the company, because there was something that you all were really building that was important.
Yeah, no, that's
so that right there is the difference. And for you guys, you're too close to it, but you don't see it. So just to give you a backstory, I met my wife at work. She got smart and got out of the business, but she was a damn good recruiter. And it's funny, I placed her. I made a fee off my wife, which is, I don't know if that's really legal, but I did. And so the plus of that is exactly what you guys just did right there, which is she gets you in a way that someone who's not in the industry would understand. Just like when she came home from UCSF and said, listen, this thing is going on, like you would get it. And you weren't talking about your industry, which was consumer goods, and she was an architect. And you're like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about, marketing, analytics, and meanwhile, I have to build a building. And so I think there's something wonderful about having a spouse who is in your space. And I'm curious, is that something that is now a constant for you guys? You totally get each other professionally? Or is it still, you got to break it down and explain, hey, look, this is what's going on? Or Meredith, or for you, because I know you're still consulting, you guys kind of start conversations in the middle, like my wife and I do, because I know exactly where she's going and who she's talking about.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about this, and I think it's very natural. I wasn't in medical devices, but I know the industry. I know the people, the types of people he works with. I know how physicians think from a different angle, but because I'm not a physician, as we talked about. But it is really interesting to hear the types of issues that he's dealing with and be able to jump in right in the middle. I remember actually about, a year ago, there was an operations issue that they were grappling with, and I would hear him talking to various folks inside his company, and I would want to know more. So he'd get off on the phone and I would ask more questions. And it was really interesting to me to kind of think alongside him. Obviously, I wasn't the one to help solve the problem, but it was interesting for me to hear about it and to be his sounding board as he was thinking through it. And I think we were talking about how that really increased as I stopped working outside the home, and as he was working more at the house after we moved to Texas, and especially during the pandemic. Because I was hearing the conversations more, and he would pop out of his office and bounce something off me. So it's actually been really fun over the past couple of years to feel even more connected and kind of understanding of what he's been doing. But it definitely helps that I was in healthcare previously.
Yeah, I mean, there's a vernacular there that is difficult for people who aren't in the space. Something as simple as reimbursement. The average person, they don't know what that means, but you guys could have that conversation at a high level over a glass of something, and it's just conversation for you two. So let's switch gears a bit. So you've got three crazies running around your house.
Yeah.
and you have a pandemic, at that age, my kids are so much older, they're so much more self-sufficient. I'm curious what it's like when you've got 3 really young kids going nuts. They can't really go anywhere. They can't really do anything. They can't go to school yet. And so how did you drive all that while still trying to maintain your sanity and your careers and everything else going on? And obviously you guys are fit. I know you still do some athletics and activity. I mean, how did you juggle all that?
You're the mastermind behind that. So
it was hard. I don't know if we didn't keep our sanity the whole time, quite honestly. But and I'll add that we added a puppy in the mix.
I got a COVID dog too. What'd you get?
A little
golden
doodle,
yeah.
a golden retriever.
Okay.
But we got Callie over Christmas of 2019, so right before lockdown. So that was an interesting dynamic as well. But luckily, we do have more space in Austin than we did in Oakland. So there is more space to spread out. Justin has an office in the house, which was very helpful. But it was a lot of like teaching boundaries to the kids too of, okay, when if it's during the workday, we can't play right in front of dad's office. Let's take a walk. If we have too much energy, let's take a walk.
That's the most polite way I've ever heard anyone say.
I mean, it didn't always come out like that, but
we have too much. I got to share that one. 'Cause my wife will love that. You remind me a lot of my wife, Meredith. And that is exactly something she would say. She always says, every problem is an opportunity to improve your situation. And that's exactly what she would say. We have too much energy right now. As they're like tearing the drapes off the wall and what else they're doing.
Yeah, but there were a lot of art projects during that time. I just, we just did the best we could, tried to keep them entertained. And luckily temperatures in Austin are,
conducive
to being outside quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, we tried to do that.
So it's interesting. I took a look at your background. And I'm not trying to embarrass you here, so please don't take it that way. But you're an incredibly highly educated individual, and you have a significant career going. And now you're doing art projects. And not to knock it, I mean, my mom stayed home growing up.
Art projects, so Matt, this is like they're phenomenal art projects. We're not,
So how do you? When I was a kid, they used to have a 78, a 45 and a 33 on the record player. How do you go from being a 78 with your mind working at warp speed to going to a 45 or 33 and saying, okay, honey, take the Q-tips out of your ears and those kinds of things? Was that a tough transition for you?
It was.
Yeah.
It was a tough transition. I wouldn't have done it any differently. I am very happy being the kind of primary person responsible for the kids these days. But it honestly was a really difficult transition. Luckily we had talked about it a lot. We both knew that this is what we wanted in this season of our lives. But it was hard to go from having really kind of dynamic, interesting conversations, having a lot of responsibility, having, a team that I really enjoyed, mentoring and working with, to having really irrational colleagues, very demanding and a little whiny at times. So it was difficult, but they're fantastic. Our kids, they make me laugh and cry, and I mean, they're very emotional.
So tell the truth, and I won't tell anybody if you admit this. At any point in time, did you ever say, I have an MBA from Yale and I'm cleaning up puke or other bodily functions? I'm like, are you kidding me?
There have been times when it goes through my head that I'm a very educated dishwasher these days. But
well, you know what? The great humbler is actually was a dog. The kids, because they're my kids, and whatever they need from a medical healthcare standpoint, I'm there. And plus you can't. I lived in a fraternity house for 3 years. You can't scare me. There's nothing that hasn't been on me already.
Yeah.
That'll be. But the dog is different because you have to bend down, pick up the dog, carry the poop with you around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And no matter how many degrees you have or whatever you've accomplished in your life, you're still carrying the bag.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if the dog does that for you. I have a big dog. Mine's 70 pounds. So his bag
significant.
remnants are considerable. So do you guys have a story or some anecdote of something that it just was sideways? Some huge meeting and the kids running in and cutting off your feed when you're having an investor meeting or anything going on where it's just you can't believe this, you're in the middle of this.
I maybe try and erase those memories from my mind, but I don't know if we really have any crazy stories.
I don't know if there was one specific.
They're probably not crazy to you. They're probably just Thursday for you, but for other people.
Yeah.
Nah, they're young. Are they?
There were times when the kids were going. I think right outside your door.
Well, yeah, there might have been a couple of things. I think we always try and I try and maximize the time, and I probably do it a little bit to a fault. When we go on vacations, right, and I'll try and sneak in a phone call here or there, right? If I can take an extra day, but I have to do a little bit of work here or there, and those are always a little bit stressful times. But I think more recently, I think it's really just been more of because of the pandemic and working from home completely, and the kids are now home at 2 or 3 o'clock it is, right? And it's like, I still have like 3 hours, and like they don't necessarily understand that. And for them, the day's over when they come home. And that wasn't necessarily an issue back, when I was going into an office, because I left and I just didn't come home, right? I wasn't necessarily behind a door that they knew I was there, but couldn't necessarily interact with. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge, and it's a little bit of an adjustment. And I think we tried to have some ground rules. We don't always stick to them, but
do they barge in?
They're pretty respectful. They understand.
Do they barge in your office? Yeah.
They barge in our middle is very artistic. And so the amount of ink and paper we go through, because she's always printing out things to color, is embarrassing.
And the printer's in his office.
And the printer's in my office. That thing is constantly right.
And so what is she printing out?
Oh, just
coloring pages. And her mind, it amazes me what she thinks of building out of different things around the house. And so she'll ask to print a picture of a cat or cat ears, and then she'll color them and cut them out and then put them on a headband of hers. So she's constantly creating something.
Or she'll ask you to print out a computer, and then she'll put a computer, and then she'll color a computer and put it on a box, and then she'll be like, I'm working like that.
Yeah, we got to get her on the next show, because this is my kind of people. I love how each kid is so unique. Like I have two, and they are as different, diametrically opposed kind of kids that you could find. One kid loves being the center of attention. One doesn't want anyone looking at her. And it's just same parents, same house, same upbringing. Everything's the same. Yeah. They're just completely different kids, and it's unique. So I imagine you guys are having the same thing. I imagine your three kids are all completely different personalities, or do you got caught a break and there's some of them are similar?
No, all three.
The first two are very different. The third is sort of a combination of the first two, but they're pretty different. And
they get along.
First is very analytical.
Yeah.
And he's very, very analytical, has been into Lego since he could put two together. And he builds these crazy Lego things now, which is really fun to see. Our second is very artistic, always creating, making art. And then our third is our little superhero wild child. He's the one that's jumping off the back of the couch.
Yep,
and
those are my favorite.
Over the Legos.
That was me. I would run through the house to get the phone and always hurdled the couch when all I had to do was walk around it. My mom would be like, must you? But I wore a towel around my neck, and I was jumping over the couch every time. It's interesting. I have my nephew is very similar to the way you described your first one, and we got him those snap circuits that are like the next step of Legos, and it teaches them how to make things electrical and how to make a helicopter go up. And he's right at that age. If you guys don't have those, I would tell you definitely get them. They're terrific for expanding their mind.
Yeah.
So you're at this interesting juncture where you're starting this new venture, and the kids are getting a little older. Do you envision going back to work, Meredith, at some point, full time?
At some point, yeah. I think that's always been part of the discussion. I don't know what that will look like, and I don't know when that might be. It's been 3 years now
Yeah.
that I've not had a full-time
Paying
day
job.
job, a paying job.
I was gonna say.
And
You get paid in hugs and all kinds of
Yeah.
other stuff
Yeah.
like that you can't equate.
Yeah.
Look, with your background, your education, whenever you want to come back, they're going to welcome you. So that part's
He's
easy.
trying to place you right now. He's
Oh,
trying to
yeah, I'm
freaking-
already
Me
thinking.
too.
I was just curious. What are you doing on Thursday? So anyhow, look, I always knew that this was the right kind of personality, but Meredith, you've made this so much more fun, and I appreciate it. I guess the last thing I would ask is, what happens when Justin's not there? How does the house go when he travels, and what's it actually like? Are you making unilateral decisions, and it's just when Justin comes home, he'll have to figure it out for himself?
I run a pretty tight ship when he's gone. So
Yeah.
I have a plan, and I laugh because we can eat at 5:30 instead of at 6. There are things that we can do, and that when he's not there, obviously they miss him so much, and they get pretty emotional when he's not there, especially for an extended amount of time. But they know the buck stops with me when he's not there. Whereas if he's there, then, well, if mom says no, then I'll go ask dad. And
By the way, that doesn't go away. That still happens.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
curious about something. My wife calls it burning up on reentry. So Justin, when you're gone for a week and she's got this on the rails, and you come in and you automatically, dinner's now at 6, and you can have fudge for breakfast and whatever else that dopey dads do. Is that something that you guys have to say, listen, you've been away for a week, we've got a new schedule, or we've got a thing working here, just stay over there?
No, I don't know if we do that, but it's definitely like, oh, you're home, like the kids need to be bathed, like you need to like catch up on some chores here, and here's your
quality time with the kids.
Yeah, better said again. But it's I definitely, and I try and get my fix back in too, and try and spend time with the kids when I get home. But usually it is hectic coming back home.
I think what's hard is that the kids have missed him. They want to see him. So especially our oldest, as soon as he walks in the door, dad, can we play catch? Dad, can we play basketball? He is still in a suit, had just come off of a 15-hour plane ride from Germany, and is sort of expected to kind of pick up immediately. And that's really hard. I remember from being a consultant traveling, and you're more tired when you come home than when you left, but everyone's expecting you to be available and jump right back in. So I try to respect that, but it's hard because the kids, they do crave that time with him.
They will figure out how to push that button with you, whatever that is. Like, my kids know that all I want to do is put my stuff down and change my clothes, and then I'm all yours. Yeah. But they don't care. They follow you right into the closet. Guys, man, I just need like a minute.
5 minutes, yeah.
Nope. My son's like, hey, did you hear what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs? Patrick Mahomes is hurt. I'm like, bud, I know, I have Google. I got it. I just want to change my clothes. Yeah, I know. Well, look, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you guys making time to be on here. You're every bit as interesting as I thought you would be, and it's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. This has been The Family Business, where family's what binds us. And this is Justin and Meredith Ballotta. Well worth listening to. Take care, guys. Good luck.
Bye.
Thanks,
See
Matt.
ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.